Welcome to the Financial Freedom Secrets Show. This is your host, Jackson Milan, the Wealth Mentor, helping business owners create financial freedom faster by mastering the language of money. Want to see how well you're tracking towards financial freedom? Complete our 40-point financial performance scorecard at wealthhealthcheck.com.au. That's wealthhealthcheck.com.au. The average score for most business owners is 18 out of 40. So complete the scorecard now and see how well you're tracking towards financial freedom.
G'day guys, this is Jackson Milan, the Wealth Mentor, and we're here for another episode of Financial Freedom Secrets, where we help you understand the simplest path for you to create financial freedom in your service business. Now, I've got a good friend of mine and a great expert to bring a different lens to this conversation of what we typically talk about here on the show, but I'm super excited about this because it's something that I've recently become very attuned to. It's taken a lot of my focus, particularly now that we're here up on our sanctuary in Far North Queensland, and I'm really looking to explore this conversation of people to have what we refer to as the triple bottom line. How can they emphasize their wealth, but also emphasize the value of their health to make sure that they live long and prosperous lives? So I'm joined by Olly Wood. Olly, how you doing, my friend?
You're really good. Thanks, Jackson. Thanks for having me on. For
those who are listening and watching that don't know you, haven't encountered the Meta Project, tell us a little bit about you and what you do, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I was someone who grew up doing every sport under the sun. I was rowing, I was playing rugby, but then I was doing the mountain climbing, the canoe polo, everything possible to get immersed into those fields. And I think something that walking through that space of multiple sports, your beliefs around how easy something is gets broken very quickly. And that ability to absorb information or learn, I think, is something I learned quickly. But the really, really key thing from a nutrition standpoint that I think served me was understanding that there was no best diet for everyone. And there was also no best diet for me all of the time, right? So it became seasonal, it became situational, depending on the next concussion I had or I had an injury, or whether it was a case of really focusing on my studies or whether it was actually the performance on the field. So all of those allowed for a different multifaceted approach at how I approached nutrition, specifically around the type of training or goals I had. And that became a really foundational concept that sort of made me start asking questions from an early age and what we went through. I naturally, from that, ironically, I went into a commerce degree, but I naturally found my way back to personal training and going through that space, working with clients one-on-one, going through and training towards certain targets. Now, what we start to learn through those spaces when we ask the right questions is, okay, I'm getting stronger, I'm progressing with my training, but I'm not dropping the body fat, I'm not progressing in the visual sense I'd like to, or even deeper down than that. So the questions that started to be asked there was, well, okay, I'm progressing, but why isn't that not showing through? And I think very much what we highlighted more and more again as I started to dive deeper and deeper into it is it doesn't matter how much exercise you do or how much harder you push that body. If you're running in the wrong direction, you'll go nowhere fast. And if we're not taking the time to look at the stress, the inflammation that our body's under, especially in the high demand spaces that we put ourselves in, we're really not addressing 90% of that picture. So when we're working in a world that says, calories are what we need to focus on, we either need to train harder or eat less, they're 90% right, but they're 100% wrong. Because until you're healthy, until you're in a space where the calories actually work, we're not inflamed, we're digesting the food that we're eating and not just eating it, right? There's a massive difference between what we eat and what we absorb for a lot of people. And starting to look at rebuilding a platform, rebuilding a base that we do feel energetic in the morning. We do have high quality recovery, and then that game starts to play a lot more of a role. So that's kind of where we started, and asking just different questions around how can we not just make sure the 1% crush it, but making sure everyone can feel better, stronger, healthier in their own bodies, and what components of that actually need to be taught about.
And I think this is particularly important for entrepreneurs and business owners, right? And I'd love to ask you about what were the synergies that you saw between doing commerce and being involved in business and being involved in kind of the high performance sports and nutrition space? What were the synergies that you saw between those two spaces?
There's so many similarities, but I think the one that I really enjoy seeing come through is simply the difference between the finite mindset and the infinite, right? So when you look at it through the lens of how can I make as much money in this year, then you've found a way to self-sabotage yourself with the long run. If focusing on dropping as much body fat in the next 6 weeks, you tend to run into some long-term issues. So I think when you step back and look through a lens that's a little bit more, where do I really want to see myself in 20 years? What's the car I want to be driving? How do I want to feel? How do I want to look? How do I want to show up in my day? That really becomes a conversation of how does my work tie into this? How I feel my day? What does my morning routine look like? Who's supporting me in that process, and who needs to be removed from that's getting in the way. So it becomes a conversation that in itself becomes a lot more inclusive.
Yeah, and I think you need to have a holistic view on these things, right? Because you can look at any one metric in isolation and it can be hugely detrimental to other areas if you're not paying attention to them, right? Just because you're 6% body fat doesn't mean that you're healthy. We've seen like many people who are bodybuilding and at a really elite level. I wouldn't consider many of those people healthy. And let's also try and translate this back to small business. Most small business owners don't necessarily see themselves as being high performance athletes or being on diets where they're only eating poached chicken and broccoli for dinner. And it's pretty boring. But what's really interesting is that in the small business and entrepreneurship space, the sheer number of entrepreneurs that sabotage their health for the growth and prosperity of their business. And I fall into this trap myself. Like when emotions are high, when you're really stressed, you're ordering Uber Eats, you're eating crap, you're skipping meals, you're drinking too much coffee, you're sabotaging your gut health, you're doing all of these things that deep down you know is wrong, but you're drawn into it because of the convenience, the perceived convenience of living a lifestyle like this. For somebody who's maybe resonates with that, they're running a business, they know that they should be getting their health in order. What's your advice to them to get back on track and have a sustainable health and wealth and business journey?
There's so many different angles we can go through. I think the first one you've just touched on is there seems to be this battle between work and health. And as soon as work gets busy, well, that has to pay the bills, so health gets sort of pushed to the side. But we're already starting to work with a very reactive lens, and we know that we're starting to be like, well, we need to work on this, so this has to go down. And what that becomes is we're flattening our body, we're working our way towards, let's use the word burnout, but some version of just feeling tired by the end of the week, not motivated, not fully fulfilled. And we get to the weekend and we have to make up for that. And whether that becomes us seeking it externally through having a beer on a Friday night, watching TV all weekend, just having no energy and trying to find something to grasp on to get ready for the next week. And it becomes that perpetual cycle of I'm going to flatten myself through the week, try bring it together in 2 days and start again. Whereas I think the first part of that conversation needs to be how can I front load your bucket so we can actually have that joy filled, have that energy filled so that we're in a position that we actually show up better in the week. And just knowing that they very much are complementary as opposed to contradicting, because if we take the time to take ourselves seriously, we need to be fitting us into our day. And we can start to look at that through the lens of a morning routine, but it also has to be where are we blocking in times for our work meetings and for the things that are important, but making sure that we're on that list. So if I don't see a workout or just simply a space that's free on Thursday for you to simply get in that appointment that you keep putting off, it's just being able to block us into that week that I think is really, really important. And if you know it's a really big week coming up, intentionally blocking out that time ahead of time to know that you're actually in that week, because everything gets pushed. Everything needs to be 20 minutes later. Oh, can you do this time? And we just find a way to push us to the side to make it happen. So starting there, I think really helps. I think most people at a really conscious level understand the awareness of we only ever grow to the level of our personal development, of our personal standard. And I think in order to build that from a confidence standpoint, we can't break our own promises, and we're breaking them every day with our own health. So I think that's where we start to at least start the conversation around how do we make sure you're successful in both areas. Well, ultimately, they're very much complementary because what you do in one thing is going to show in other areas. And simply that building of your own internal standards, those internal wins that you have, big or small, and that little tap on the back, well done, starts to show through in how you present yourself, how you walk through your day. So it's very much a conversation that I think starts that. It's not something that's working against each other.
Yeah, this has really helped me, mate, because I was never somebody who was super motivated by fitness and working out and whatnot, and I would always find a way to procrastinate. And then you were exactly right. Like when I'd get busy, I'd skip meals or I'd push things back or I'd just not do things. And I started asking myself, well, if I've got this session in the diary to go and train jiu-jitsu, or I've got this session in the diary to go and prepare and eat a healthy meal, what if it was a client meeting? Would there be any circumstance that I wouldn't turn up to that client meeting or cancel it with 5 minutes notice? You just wouldn't do it. So, okay, why am I changing my value set for this when it's as equally, if not even more important? I was looking at it from that lens that they started to become staples of my diary, and blocking the time out and just emphasizing the value of those things is critically important. So I think that's really great advice, and I advocate everyone does it. I think the next burden here is that people feel like if they want to lose weight, right, let's face it, entrepreneurs, they carry an extra few kegs around the middle, they wish they were healthier, And it's because of that lifestyle that they've fallen into a rhythm that has become convenient. And they feel like the only alternative is dieting. Is that the truth?
Oh, we've opened a whole can of worms. So for me, you mentioned before, going into the space of bodybuilding and getting to this point of like really, really low body fats. And within everything, we have a level of what's healthy and then what is becoming performance-based. Meaning, if I'm running 3Ks a couple times a week, it's perceived as healthy. If I'm now getting ready for a marathon or an ultra marathon, there's a level where that's like, that's no longer healthy. That's just you getting really good at your sport. And I've done the bodybuilding shows and got down to 4, 5, 6% body fat. And when you look your best, you feel your worst, right? And it's really getting into a level that you are no longer healthy. So there's certainly a shift between those two. But when we look at going through the lens of trying to get our body back in shape, we need to make sure that we're looking through the lens of what we're actually after. Because if we set a goal, we better be careful what that is, because we might actually achieve it. If the goal is to simply drop weight and we feel weaker, we feel tired, but we lost 10 kilos, is that really the goal? Or was it making sure our energy, our productivity, we showed up in a way that we could feel proud of? So I think just being clear of what the goal is initially and how we're actually presenting that, because a lot of us know that these diets potentially are detrimental to our long-term health, yet we continue to do them simply through the lens of the goal we set. So I think that needs to be the first point of that. The big part that I think ties into what we've just talked about around it being complementary as opposed to contradicting is we all wait for the perfect time, right? And you see this in the work environment all the time. But if you wait until the perfect week to nail your health, what happens when it goes back to when you're busy, all right? We have those conversations every day. I'm busy right now, so I'm going to have to wait till things die down before I get top of my health. And then my simple question is, well, are you planning on never being busy again? Right? If you're not taking the time to anchor in those steps on the busy weeks, then you learn nothing from there moving forward. So taking the time to anchor in those steps that happen no matter what, right? You have those non-negotiables of every day, then you know that anything above that's a bonus, but at least you've anchored in those.
Yes.
And that's where we start to have a little bit of a conversation of our uphill habits versus our downhill ones. Now, downhill habits are the ones where we have a disengagement, where things are getting a little bit busy. So we decide to have the couple of beers, or we decide to watch TV and just kind of blur out a couple of hours. The problem is when we come back to reality, we're just as tired, we've got just as much as done, we've just had less time to sleep now. So that little uphill habit could be, how can I just add in a couple of squats while I'm waiting for the microwave? Or why could I make sure while I'm boiling the water for the coffee, I'm making sure I get in 500 mils of water? It's just those little nudges in our day that mean at very minimum, even if it's flat out, what's the smallest and minimum non-negotiable that I must have to make sure I'm still moving forward for me? And you see it show in. Now I'm not just getting a stimulant, I'm actually hydrated and I'm going to show up better in that day. So there's a lot of components to there, but I'm going to, as one simple action step for anyone watching that's in that space right now or listening, it would simply be, the reason you can't find time to exercise is because you're trying to find an hour and a half. Of course you didn't find that time. Tell me where 10 minutes is and you'll find it everywhere. So just start there, and as soon as you realize that you feel really good and you're in that space and you've zoomed out a little bit from all the work you needed to do, you might find that you do a 20 or 30-minute walk because it actually felt really good.
This has really helped me, mate. That minimal acceptable standard, right? It's so hard to talk yourself out of it. And you're right. Like once the hardest momentum to create is that initial momentum.
Yep.
And once you're in the motions, the compounding of that momentum is quite easy. And for me, I guess I'm very fortunate because we live on this beautiful property, and there's so many ways for me to reduce the barrier to say, hey, I'm just going to go out for a walk with the animals, or I'm going to go do some yard work, or I'll do some gardening, or I'm going to go for a walk up the hill and do a hike. And it's easy to reduce that threshold. So it's about understanding how do we reduce those thresholds and create those tiny habits, those anchors that become the new normal of that minimal acceptable standard. But not all things work the same for everyone, right? Whether it be about training and whether that be particularly about nutrition. Once again, I'm not an expert in this space, Olly, and I'd love to get your feedback. People say that of the whole equation, 70% of your success in fitness and health is diet. Would you agree with that, mate?
Yeah. So I'd look at this through the lens of, regardless of how much nutrition or exercise, again, it's going to be situational depending on what we look at.
Sure.
But first we need to look at, well, if we don't have sleep or we don't have a foundation to work with, then neither of those two matter anyway, because what we're doing is we're pushing harder on the accelerator and we've still got our foot on the brake, right? So we haven't found a way to look at just making it a little bit easier. And as you mentioned, building momentum. I think the situation we get into is the all or nothing approach of health, especially from a nutritional lens. Regularly, 95% of the time, people tell me that they struggle with nutrition. But really, as we've said, from this habitual component of where do we start, I think if you try to do step 1, 2, 3, and 4 at the same time, and you haven't ingrained that as a habitual habit every day, then it becomes very easy. Okay, week got busy, whatever, things fall off. So it's very much building one at a time and building up from there, and just making sure you nail that first. But through the lens of where do we start? What do we focus on? I think we need to step back and actually look at the bigger picture of there are certain components of how you feel that are simple signals to your body. And the trouble is that we are becoming really disconnected mind to body with what's actually going on. When we feel bloated and tired, we reach for another coffee rather than what did I just eat? And taking the time to look at simply having a little bit more of a connection between those things is something that will just serve you in the right direction and building the skill set of how I feel and how I become my own professional around how I should feel, right? So when we walk through that approach, I think hopefully I'm certainly seeing some people getting away from going to their local GP for health advice, right? They are fantastic when we go into the lens of acute disease, and we've seen an improvement in food production, we've seen an improvement in disease prevention, these sort of things. But what we're seeing that's a really, really scary inverse relationship in that same time period is a massive increase in chronic inflammation, right? And chronic diseases coming through. And knowing that genetics only play a 20% role at max in this equation and certainly don't change in 10 years, but actually starting to look at the environmental factors and all these other components that we're not taking care of. So rather than looking at simply the nutrition training lens, this is why we're getting you to step back one lens a little bit first. There's some pretty scary facts around things like autism, right? They're going from 1 in 5,000 people had autism from around 1970. It's starting to really, really escalate to and especially since 2012, it seems, if we don't slow that trajectory down, it might get as close as 1 to 3 by 2035, right? That's a lot of kids.
That's
right?
huge.
We're seeing the same space, which if I had an area of assets to dive in here, Jackson, I'd be looking at IVF treatment, right? It's an area where we're starting to see a massive increase in infertility. And if the trajectory of that by 2050 is they assume that over nearly everyone's going to have to use some form of technology in order to conceive. Wow. Because we just don't have the sperm count that we used to, right? Again, that's not a genetic level. That's an environmental component.
Yes.
We're seeing the same things with diabetes. We're seeing the same thing with chronic fatigue. It's these inflammatory conditions that are becoming so much more chronic because we've got really, really good at fixing acute diseases and blasting our body from any disease. And in the process, we're decimating our gut of the diversity and the strength required to have a strong, healthy immune system, have the ability to know what's a parasite and what's just normal function that's throwing inflammation through the roof. So simply getting awareness of what we call the 7 system spoilers, diving into things like antibiotics. We know that through the 90s, they were given out like candy. Yeah. Now starting to bring that back and be mindful of actually, can I get through this with my own natural immune system, or is there something where I really need them? That's obviously going to be a conversation with your medical doctor, but looking at things like anti-inflammatory drugs, looking at acid reflux medications. We're just taking them rather than knowing what foods are coming through that are actually causing that burping, farting, bloated, whatever that might be, and just continuing through our day. So addressing, the root cause of whatever those issues are and knowing what's causing that inflammation in the first instance allows you to simply have an engine that's actually working. We're moving you from the Toyota Prius to the Ferrari because we're actually building a metabolism and metabolic rate that's going to work. And now once things starts to function, now things feel good again, now we can have a bit more of a conversation around macronutrients. Until we have that sorted, until we feel good, we're just pushing shit uphill. And I think that's where we need to start.
I agree, mate. Once again, I don't know much about gut health, but I know that from even our transition to the farm, we're not on mains water. We've got fresh spring water and just even the taste of it. I went back to Sydney recently and drank water out of the tap, and it was disgusting. We're growing food, our own fresh produce. We're not eating out, so there's not a whole lot of processed foods or anything like that. And my overall energy, my mood, everything has just improved drastically. So this is quite a complicated area. There's obviously a lot at stake here. Like, we're not even talking about day-to-day function. But we're talking about future generations and the impact that could be had by the changes we make here. And that can be really overwhelming. So where do you even start to improve things like gut health?
Without buying an amazing farm in Queensland, as you've seen, you've indirectly looked at the quality of your water, the quality of the air, high quality foods grown at home, not being constantly bombarded by toxins inside of the vegetable oils we're eating. I think there's a lot of components that are just those little nuances that as soon as you start chipping away, that make a really, really big difference. But the first one we need to look at is simply food, right? If we're noticing the majority of our diet is highly processed, then simply that shift towards eating more whole foods has to be a foundation. And if you take yourself seriously as a producer, as an effective leader, as whatever your role is in your world and you want to show up better with, simply fueling the engine with the fuel that's going to allow it to work needs to be step one. So being mindful of simply whole foods, looking at things like your vegetable oils. And when we're seeking, if you notice your stress, just start with having some water and taking 5 deep breaths rather than seeking something externally to fix the issue. Although those sound really simple, start to notice how many times those show up in your life, and you'll start to notice how many times you're just self-sabotaging yourself a little bit along the way. Because things like the anti-inflammatory drug can be great for 3 days, but if you start to take it week after week, ironically, it's actually one of the root causes of causing a lot of the inflammation further down the line because we're just bombarding that system. So I think starting there really, really is helpful, and looking at things like your sun exposure and taking the time to just take a meeting outside, right? If I've got, I did it the other day, 2 hours of call reviews, for example, I could either sit here on a screen, find something to eat while I'm doing it, or I could put it on my phone and walk and listen and do that thing. You obviously do that a lot with all your videos, and it's quite entertaining because you're also walking through a farm and it becomes easier to watch, right? So exactly. There's a balance of that you can find those little integrations to see what work can I do to just get moving. We're not made to sit in a chair 18 hours a day. So let's find a way to just make sure there's a little bit more blood flow.
100%. And it's made such a difference. I think the thing that I've become really conscious of is my release of stress hormone. And look, when you're an entrepreneur, there is stress. It is inevitable. How you choose to deal with that stress is another thing. And there's many people who are great regulators and work very well under stress. But stress and the hormones and what is happening inside the body as a result of that has a massive toll. And from what I understand, it has changes on your metabolism, it has impacts on blood pressure, all of these other things that are happening inside your body that can cause this inflammation. And one of the habits that I've got into is if I feel the pressure after I finish a call or after I've finished a piece of work, I just go outside and I go for a stroll. I get some sun. Even if it's raining, I get wet, doesn't matter. And it's a reset in the system, which allows me to recalibrate and reduce those stress hormones and then get back to a healthy rhythm. And the results that happen from these types of things, like for me, it's been a relatively nuanced and gradual impact, but I definitely feel better. I was watching a video recently by Jordan Peterson. And Jordan Peterson, obviously very high stressed, public figure, highly scrutinized, very opinionated, but he was having issues with autoimmune issues. He had issues with his weight. He had a number of other mental health issues, and he very drastically transitioned to an all beef diet.
Yeah.
Crazy. Not many people could do it. It resolved all of his autoimmune issues. He lost something like 30 kilos. His mental health is better. Energy levels are better. He's sleeping better. It just goes to show a very extreme example of changing your diet changes the physiology and how many of your health issues are represented. So I guess throwing this back to you, Olly, obviously this is a very extreme example. What's your view on people making these kinds of drastic shifts, and what can we learn from, say, this kind of experience?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'm familiar with him. I'm not familiar with that approach he's taken. Going into the space of carnivore and going the other extremes with vegan, for example, both of them ironically seem to have the same benefit when we're in that situation of really, really high inflammation. Now, one of them, what we notice a lot with vegan and somewhat vegetarian, depending on how well they go on it, is they usually feel fantastic for about 6 weeks and they start to decline from there because their body goes through some level of sort of adrenaline and certainly with lacking certain nutrients, their body goes into this unique space where it just has to get better at using nutrients. And I think one thing to take away from that we've seen with fasting and some level of autophagy, and that we're seeing through drastic diets like that, is simply if we're so comfortable eating the way we do, if we make a shift that drastic, our body has to actually get off its ass and actually be like, oh, now I've actually got to be effective. I've got to absorb and extract the nutrients from what I'm eating and actually function really well, right? A simple example we'd see in this of every day is if we eat really salty food every day, and then we take it out for a week and we add it back in. We're, oh God, where'd that come from? We see it with stress, right? We're just so used to this new baseline of stress that we don't feel stressed anymore. But if you threw that at me 10 years ago, I'd have a mental breakdown. So it's something that's purely an accumulation of time. And seeing that with excessive shifts in diet like that can actually kind of rev the body up to wake things up. But the long-term impact on that, I personally don't see working with everyone, right? We see someone like that as all or nothing, just makes it work regardless. And it's the same thing we see with athletes where they're stretching before workouts, they're doing all these funky things, and it just works anyway. You get the normal person going through that and they start popping and tweaking muscles all over the show. So there's a level of resilience that comes down to not necessarily a genetic component, but certainly there's an environmental aspect there as well. So there's so much to it, really, Jackson. I could dive into so many reasons from like a chemical level and all of this stuff going on. But I think just understanding that, if your gut's not happy, your mood's not good. And if your mood's not good, that impacts your physical component. And even if we get a dopamine release from exercise, and that cycle is just perpetual. So there's a choice component in it and a reinforcement of, is this helpful for me? Because someone could feel hungry and they say, yes, I can finally feel my metabolism working. The next person says, oh, I'm freaking out. Let's find the next hamburger to eat, right? So there's a real reinforcement of certain dopamine or certain reward systems that we can start to look at, that either the introduction of a behavior or simply even the introduction of discomfort can now become pleasurable. And I think that's where we start to see people going to the gym every day and they start to notice that it becomes pleasurable. They enjoy it because it's hard. And it's the same thing in the office where we're like, well, everyone's gone out to drinks and I'm going to get an extra 2 hours in, and it became pleasurable. So I think it's all, we've kind of got a couple of different ways here, Jackson, but what we've done is talk about our body's ability to reinforce what we enjoy. So if you keep telling yourself that you don't like exercise because you've got to work, it will happen. If you find a way to reinforce how health makes you better at work, and by making this hard in the morning and creating a challenge before most people are up makes you better in the day, you'll also reinforce that. So it just becomes some level of, what do you want to reinforce in your day that allows you to show up better, more confident, in a space that you feel more energetic, and creating a reward system around that, however small or big that is. And if you haven't done it, I suggest you do start small.
And there's so much at stake here, mate, because I think as an entrepreneur, we focus a lot on the strategies and tactics of our day-to-day, like, okay, I need to increase my KPIs, or I need to get more leads, or I need to make more sales, or whatever it might be. There's so much opportunity, so many chips that are left on the table in terms of peak performance as a human being, that if you've hit that invisible ceiling of success in your business, that looking within and focusing on this is the most untapped opportunity that so many people just never get around to exploring. Something that I'm definitely discovering, so many dividends to be paid in so many different aspects of life, not just in terms of profit and wealth, but just overall well-being, quality relationships, quality of life in general, which we all deserve, right? We're in business because we want to create freedom and flexibility. No one on their deathbed wishes they spent more time in the office, right? There's so much at stake here. So let's talk a little bit about making these shifts in diet, mate, because look, I agree. I couldn't be a vegan full time. My girlfriend's a vegan. We eat vegan meals a few times a week, but I definitely have these cravings, and I definitely follow those cravings towards what I feel my body needs to be fueled, to be healthy. This is not about a diet. This is about a lifestyle change. And many people can be overwhelmed by that, mate. So what would be your advice to somebody who, they are busy, they don't feel like they can spend all the hours and hours in the kitchen prepping and then getting every meal ready? How do they go about turning this into a meaningful lifestyle change where it doesn't become a burden?
Yeah, I think you've already started the conversation really, really well. And I think it's the same conversation you likely have in your community a lot, right? There's so many people that are chasing the dog chasing the car. What the fuck happens if they ever catch it, right? They just haven't thought about it, and the object keeps moving. And if they have a target for 1 mil, it moves to 2 and then 3, and then it just builds from there because they never really define what's enough or what's something they're really looking for. And I think that vehicle, as you mentioned, treating the wealth as your vehicle to financial freedom, I think it's taking the time to look at, well, if you get to financial freedom, do you have a vehicle in which you want to enjoy it in? Meaning you only got one body, so you might as well look after it. And how many people do we know that get to that point of so-called financial success, and they don't have a level of health or even relationships that have come along for the ride? And I think that's simply where we started today's conversation around building up the level of human you are. The goal becomes an expectation as opposed to a target. And if we seek a target and we work really hard to get there, I think it's the wrong way around. If we simply become the person and act out that would be the person that would achieve the goal, now we're in a position that we're simply doing that because that's who we are. It's our identity. It's who we are through our day-to-day tasks. So breaking it down to those steps and simply looking at it as I'm not on a health kick and I'm not just doing this diet thing. For clients within our program, what we see a lot of the time is it's no longer the meta diet. It's his diet, my diet, right? It becomes ownership of what they feel best on because we go through the nuances of what do they feel best on? What are those, as you mentioned, I'm feeling these cravings towards certain foods. What happens if I add that in? Do I feel better or worse? And just starting to build that base, because if you go off the new superfood and you add it in, and there's always a powerful placebo effect of I now feel better, and that lasts 2 weeks, and then you find the new one and the new one. We go through a perpetual loop of not actually listening to our own body, which is, as you've said, both through your environment, you remove noise, but also you're listening to internally what's coming through. So a really simple way that I'd look at from a stimulus standpoint is just identify the loops that you might be in now, using caffeine to wake up and alcohol to calm down, or some version of that that you're doing externally. How could we go through a simple replacement? Because what I don't want you to do is say, cool, no alcohol. And you sit there at 5 o'clock and you're like, there's usually something in this hand about now, right? So can I replace that to different drink that you can enjoy that's not alcoholic? Is there something that you can do to wake up in the morning that allows you to still feel energetic? It could be as simple as a couple of stretches, actually having breakfast or having a cold shower. Whatever version of that is not extremely painful for you, like a cold shower for most, and just find a way in how you can naturally build back that energy. Now, I don't think it necessarily has to be morning or night because both of them are really going to tie into each other. But if you're struggling with being productive in your day, you're finding ways to do more. First, you need to step back and look at your actual opportunity to have capacity to be productive, which comes back from you fitting you back in your day. And like we started today, front loading your buckets. What are you doing to fill your joy cup? What are you doing to fill your energy cup? So you actually have something to give over that week.
Yeah, I love that, mate. And I think the big part here, and I felt this myself, is the fear of taking that step. Give you an example, the cold showers. For my entire life, I don't care if it's 40 degrees Celsius outside, always have hot showers, fearful of cold showers. And when we moved up to the property here, and I've been hearing a lot of stuff around the Wim Hof method and all the other people that are talking about the benefits of cold showers. And I got into the habit. I said, I'm just going to try it. I know it's going to be horrible and I'm going to do it. And I've not had a hot shower since we've been here in October. And it changes everything. Really does. So it's these little things. And I think it's the lens, and I really love your analogy here, mate, of the vehicle. If we looked at, say, if I only had one car for the rest of my life, how would I treat it differently? Would I service it more regularly? Would I make sure that the tyres are rotated? Would I not leave empty McDonald's containers on the floor and all of these other things? Would I ensure that I park it somewhere where it's not going to get hail damage when there's a storm? And we just applied it that we've only got one body. There's no changing it. We've got to make sure that we look after it. So it's actually going to be there for us to get into our 90s and hopefully to 100 to enjoy all of the fruits of our labor. Because what's the point of working yourself to the bone, burning the candle at both ends, only to be dog tired and have all of these illnesses and injuries or other things that hold you back from your ability to actually enjoy it all? So you talk all my language, mate, which is fantastic. Hopefully it's resonating with those that are listening and watching. So Olly, who is your ideal client, mate? Who do you work with that gets the best result?
Yeah, for us, and I think this conversation, it's likely the people that are leaning in right now and starting to notice, like, this really is starting to speak my language, are looking at a bigger picture because they're intellectually curious around how to get their body feeling better. But I think the simple question becomes, if your goal is to get a quick fix in 6 weeks, not learn anything about your health and just follow a plan so you can lose some weight, that's not what we're about. And what we've focused so much on doing is we want to get you towards certain targets of let's get you dropping body fat, let's get you building your energy up. But it's more a case of how do we show up every day? And that really has been a conversation around understanding your gut has such a perpetual impact on how you move, how you think, how you interact with your kids, and just that leadership component of actually understanding you and how that then spreads to everyone else. But I think the simple lens is when we look at making sure that this isn't just cool, I want to follow a plan and get in shape. It's, I want to build a skill set that I now understand my body for the rest of my life. And as I see all these changes going on with food production and with how the health system is working, I really want to take ownership of my health and make sure we're heading in the right direction, knowing that it's going to allow me to show up every day in a way that I feel proud of and be able to make those small little tweaks and how my family is able to stay healthy long term. So I think that's really it. I think there's really a space of people seeing their body not respond like it used to. They feel like they're spinning their wheels. They just feel a little bit more sluggish and they want answers rather than just a plan. And I think that's really where we step in.
I love that, mate. Fantastic. So if anybody's listening or watching and they'd love to connect, what's the best way, or if you've got a resource for them to tap into, what can they sink their teeth in?
Yeah, absolutely. I put a lot of stuff on Instagram and Facebook that you can definitely find me there just under Olly Wood. Nice and simple name to remember. But through our website, themetaproject.co, we have a free 5-day challenge that I think would be really, really a beautiful transition from today's conversation. If you've walked through this, we can simply dive a little bit deeper into 5 days worth of quick action steps you can actually install and some resources through each one of those days so you can actually see what that looks like tangibly for you. So if you want to dive deeper into that, that's completely free and you can dive into that from our website.
Fantastic. We'll include all the links in the show notes. So, mate, if you're thinking one last piece of advice for those listening or watching to take away, what would that one piece of advice be?
Do it for you, not to you. We go through this approach of having to do something and should to do something, but it's really a case of if you're going to make this habit last long term, you do it from feeling good, not bad. And I think we start to make health changes when we get to a point of pain. It's like, right, I need to change something, but that cannot be the same motivation that we use long term. It has to come from a place of self-compassion. So just making sure that we're aware of those shifts and motivations behind why you want to make changes, both physically, mentally, and maybe even deeper from a cellular level. It's just making sure that comes from a level of, as Jackson said really nicely about the car analogy, is just looking after that damn thing so it's still around in 40 years for you to enjoy the life that you've built.
Fantastic, mate. This has been super valuable. I've got some great takeouts. So, guys, just remember, you need to emphasize the importance of this. Do this for yourself, and because it's going to lead you to a happier, healthier, and more enjoyable life. And so, Olly, I appreciate you making the time, mate, and looking forward to steering some people your way. Guys, if you've enjoyed this episode, make sure you reach out to Olly. Make sure that you like and share this, and we look forward to catching you for the next episode of Financial Freedom Secrets. And we'll catch you then. Thanks, Olly.
Cheers, man. Really enjoyed it.